It has been 2 months exactly since I did my last video, and that's a long time. I don't think I've actually ever taken a break that long, maybe at the start of YouTube, since I started doing Vainglory videos properly all those years ago. It has been an interesting 2 months, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it because that's not what you're here for. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time on my full-time job, a lot of time with my family, a big break from content creation, even thinking about content, and it's actually been quite nice for me. So I'm going to use this 2-month anniversary or 2-month break-aversary, whatever we want to call it, to talk about the big news that just dropped, the news that directly impacts me, directly impacts a lot of players across the world, and in general doesn't look good for Wild Rift. Let's take a look. So, you guys might have seen this on Twitter. If you haven't, I will put the link to this particular article in the description below. If you are not interested in listening to my thoughts, the TLDR of this entire thing is Wild Rift Esports is no longer going to be a thing, or at least no longer going to be a thing supported by Riot in any regions outside of Asia. I don't know why I said Asia. And Asia, they've spun it quite positively. I personally read this as kind of like it's kind of a cost-saving exercise as well. They look like they're combining China, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia. Like the Asian market is all getting put into one big kind of multinational tournament that is going to be going on over the course of 2023. But everywhere else in the country, everywhere else in the world, can basically get effed. It's essentially what the nice way of this message is saying. I'll read it out and then we'll talk about it. Next steps for Wild Rift Esports. A year ago, we launched the inaugural season of Wild Rift Esports, Riot's first mobile esport. We went in with all the aspiration, ambition, and resources we provide our major esports. While we built an exciting sport across several regions this past year, we have decided to put our focus where our mobile esports and gaming are flourishing and wind down our own competitive operations across the rest of the world. The translation of that is that Asia and China specifically, are the only regions that are doing well in terms of A, probably player growth, and B, definitely viewership for esports. So they're going to focus on those regions, which I don't blame them for from a business perspective. In 2023, we will centralize the operation and focus of Wild Rift Esports in Asia, the biggest and most active mobile esport market in the world. The new Wild Rift League in Asia will be the first Riot cross-regional professional mobile esports league and will replace the original Wild Rift Esports in April of 2023. This new league ecosystem will consist of 12 teams from China's WRL and 8 teams from the other 2022 Asian regions. They didn't specify which ones those will be, but I assume it's Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Southeast Asia. The season will be structured as 2 splits each year and will focus on showcasing the best talent from the most competitive regions in our sport. Basically, really funny the way they phrased this. I actually think from a comms perspective, it's kind of shitty. They basically said, we think that Asia is the most competitive. We think that Asia is the best. And every other region wasn't even competitive anyway, so why bother? You could read it like that. Clearly, that's not how they meant it. Clearly, they meant it as like Asia is the most vibrant, it's the most competitive, we have the most viewership, the most engagement. But you can read it, especially that last sentence, where they're like, everyone in Asia was way better than the rest of the world, so why give a fuck about the rest of the world? And you can read it like that. Clearly not meant like that, but I'm just saying, sometimes when you're crafting these things, you do have to think about the ways they could get taken. I know that I have had 2 separate large content creators reach out to me and say, so they just think the rest of the world is shit then. And I didn't think that, I personally didn't take that message from this, but I can see why that message has been taken from the way this was phrased. 2 splits, we have no idea how long those splits are. I'm not sure how many teams were originally in WRL, but it sounds like it might just be all of the WRL teams plus 8 teams from the rest of the region. To me, this basically says China was the best region by far. China was the most watched and most engaged region by far. China's probably our biggest country. However, a close second was the rest of Asia, Southeast Asia specifically, right? So that was probably what is being said here with this kind of like focusing and doubling down. It's like China's good. We need to give China some kind of fun outside of just playing against China, because obviously they want to prove themselves best on a worldwide stage, although it will never be a worldwide stage, right? And so we're gonna bring in like kind of like our second best regions, the ones that clearly had the most engagement outside of outside of the rest of the world, outside of China, which I get. And plus, from a geographical standpoint, from a tournament integrity standpoint, China is in Asia, clearly, so you can probably assume that you'll have relatively playable ping. LANs won't be too hard to fly everyone out to. If you do have offline events, it should be relatively easy to get sorted. Like, it makes sense from a tournament logistics point of view, right? Why they're doing that. Given the vigorous mobile esports market in Asia and the level of competition in these regions, as showcased at Icons 2022, basically everyone else in the world sucks, we're thrilled to bring international play to the Wild Rift Esports regular season for the first time. The new Wild Rift Asia League will bring the intensity and hype of regional rivalries more regularly to our fans in Asia, and we'll have more detail to share about this new league in early 2023. This is classic PR stuff, just focusing on the good part, because one could say very easily that this is probably a net good thing for people in the Asian regions playing professionally, especially. I would say that the SEA teams are probably in general going to take a hit, because ultimately you're going to just lose the number of SEA teams that can compete at a high level. So I don't know how many teams they're going to give to SEA. My guess would be 2 Korea, or like 1 Korea, 1 Vietnam, or 2 Vietnam, 1 Japan, and 4 Southeast Asia. But they could very easily be like 5 Southeast Asia, 1 Vietnam, 1 Korea. I never know. I don't think Vietnam's technically included in SEA, just in terms of like tournament brackets. I don't know. I mean, I'm not entirely sure how those like countries are broken down in terms of where they slot into the Wild Rift esports scene. But either way, I imagine the SEA will get the bulk. The SEA will probably get the bulk of the teams, but it's still going to be less SEA teams competing, because it's obviously just loads of Chinese teams. And what I think is dangerous here is if you just have these SEA teams slotted in, like SEA, Korean, Japan teams, who all were not on the level of the Chinese teams, if you just have them slotted into the China League, and then they just get beaten up for like a year, that's not going to feel very good for anyone outside of China. And then they're just going to be dead weight. And I imagine if that's the case, we might even see the rest of Asia just culled, and it's just China. And like Wild Rift Esports does not operate outside of China. But I mean, like, I'm just being cynical because that's the mood I'm in, but there we go. As part of the new plan outside of Asia, we will no longer directly operate Wild Rift Esports League, and instead unlock the opportunity for third parties to host events, so that we have our priority and focus on the upcoming Wild Rift Asia League. We believe these changes will give the community the time and runway to grow organically, I'll talk about that in a minute, and establish what role high-level competition will play in their ecosystem. Spoiler alert, fucking none. And as the Wild Rift Esports landscape evolves, we'll be ready to move in lockstep. So, what this is saying is they are not going to provide official support. After just like literally, I'm like 9 months after we had that complete rebrand for every league outside, every league worldwide, the full, like they must have spent a bomb on creative rebrands for every single league at the start of this fucking year. And then they just drop it. I mean, look. I understand right now financially across the world it's going to be tough in 2023. So look, I don't blame Riot for their decision, and they probably couldn't have predicted what was going to happen financially, right? I mean, whatever. But I know when I'm creating a mobile game, and if I don't know, then I'm stupid, that the West do not engage, like North America, I mean, Brazil definitely does, but like North America, Europe, in general, don't engage with mobile games the same way that the Asian markets do. Brazil definitely does. Like, Brazil has got a really big Free Fire, like, has got a strong pedigree in mobile games. They just obviously didn't pick up Wild Rift to the extent that they would have liked. Although I am surprised that they are stopping Brazil, because I felt like it was, especially from a content creation standpoint, it looked like the most active region outside of SEA and China. So, and probably even in terms of just Twitch content creators, had the most Twitch content creators out of any region. But where was I even going with my sentence? But yeah, if I'm operating a mobile game, like, I have to have a multi-year plan in place. If I really expect to make a dent on cultural, I guess, cultural approach or cultural viewpoints towards mobile esports, I'm hoping that you have a multi-year plan for that. You are not changing the world of mobile esports in the West in a year. It's just not happening. So, that's why I'm surprised. It looked like with the full rebrand that was happening at the start of this year, I genuinely thought that they expected to suck for a little bit, and they would use that sucking as a USP. And it would form part of a wider marketing strategy. What this tells me right now is if player numbers and player uptake and player retention in North America, Brazil, anywhere outside of China and SEA was good, they probably wouldn't have done this. That's what that's telling me. And I might be reading into this too much, but this is my genuine opinion. If Wild Rift as a game, outside of esports, if Wild Rift as a game was doing well in Europe, North America, LATAM, Brazil, etc., they wouldn't have done this. Because they probably would have thought the game's still growing. Esports is a natural part of our USP for Riot Games. And so therefore, we're going to keep it going. Maybe we reduce it in scope a little bit, but we keep it going. We go for like a more budget version or whatever, but we understand that, giving something for our top players to strive for is important. And, we accept that the viewership might be low right now, but the game's growing, so we think the viewership will grow in the long term. That's probably the way I would have looked at it if I was I was looking at Wild Rift from that point of view. But if my opinion is that the game clearly can't be doing that well. And if the game was doing well, I don't think this would have been the decision. So my viewpoint is that the game has struggled outside of Southeast Asia and China, and therefore esports is completely unnecessary. Now, there were two paths from that point. Either they hope that the game uptake will be better in North America and in Europe, and maybe they'll do some marketing around it. I don't know. Or they're just saying we'll do a Vainglory. We'll run the servers until it becomes completely unviable to run the servers in these regions, and then we'll just shut it down in those regions. Riot don't generally shut down things, so that would be an interesting viewpoint. There's a whole load of backstory into Wild Rift and like lawsuits with Mobile Legends, with Tencent being blocked from doing AOV worldwide, and then Riot being a little bit too late to the party. I wrote quite a big marketing essay on this. The TLDR is that there's something called the free-to-play conundrum, right? And if any of you are existing Mobile Legends players or whatever, and you didn't switch, you'll probably understand this. And it's probably why people who've played League of Legends for a long time understand this. Free-to-play games have a very low barrier to entry when they come out, especially when they are new in the market, and especially when they are like the first of their genre. League of Legends was a great example of this. It was one of the first standalone-ish free-to-play MOBAs. Obviously, MOBA existed before that in the Warcraft 3 mods. There was Heroes of Newerth. There were competitors. But League of Legends was one of the first to adopt a truly free-to-play model. And it was a standalone game. The free-to-play model is very insidious. Low barrier to entry, you start playing, and slowly you kind of unlock content for free. And then some of that portion of that audience spends money. And then over years, they keep playing and they keep spending money. And then you get to 10 years down the line and you look back and I'm like, I've spent 10 years of my life in this game. I've probably spent a shit ton of money. I don't really want to give it up. And that's probably the way that Mobile Legends AOV players feel. Like 4 years before Wild Rift was released, Mobile Legends was already building a huge player base in SEA. So then you just throw Wild Rift out there and you hope that because it's the original, because it has the brand power and the access to the league ecosystem like KDA and Arcane, and there's the cultural ties there, because it's higher quality, which it is, I think it is higher quality, but that's the kind of USP, the higher quality, more fluid, feels like League PC, that you hope that USP is enough. Well, the experiment failed. It was not enough. People who have spent 4 years in Mobile Legends have friend groups in Mobile Legends. They have spent shit tons of money in some of them in Mobile Legends, loads of time in Mobile Legends. They are like, some of them are like going to be the highest rank in Mobile Legends, and they don't want to just like randomly drop being whatever the high rank in Mobile Legends or AOV was and go and grind from the beginning in Wild Rift. You know, I genuinely believe unless you offer some kind of buy-in scheme when you release a new game in a genre, you say, right, send us your account info on whatever game, and we will give you X amount of free shit in our game to get you started. Oh, your account level MMR in Mobile Legends is this. All right, we're not going to set you to the lowest. We'll set you to where we believe most Mobile Legends players of that rank will fit in our ranked ladder. We'll give you a little boost to make sure you're not playing complete newbie games, right? Unless you have that, you know, I think it's going to be so impossible to get players to switch, because this free-to-play issue just means that players have invested a lot of their time in their life in games that they don't want to then just jump onto another game. That's the problem that Wild Rift had. They were just too late. It doesn't matter that they were the original. It doesn't matter that they were higher quality. It wasn't enough to get people to say, oh, that 4 years that I spent grinding Mobile Legends with my huge friend groups that all play Mobile Legends, with actually a quite established pro scene in Mobile Legends, especially in SEA, yeah, I'm just going to give that up. No, it just wasn't enough. And that's the lesson that I think Riot probably looked back at and have learned and thought, whatever we did wasn't actually enough to get people to switch. But anyway, look, that this part of the statement here, that, you know, I would have assumed they had a multi-year plan. They went for a full rebrand at the start of this year. I was fully expecting this to be kind of like a longer than one season thing. It wasn't. Whatever has happened is there clearly must have been a review internally. The whole game must have been struggling, you know, outside of China. And so they've kind of just said, well, it's not worth the money. We don't think there's likely going to be growth there because the game's not growing. And what they've said is they basically said we're going to let people run third-party tournaments. I don't know what that process looks like. I don't know if you could just like say, well, I'm going to run a Wild Rift tournament now, I'm just going to do it, or you still have to apply and get approved or whatever. That's that, and letting the community decide how important esports will be in their ecosystem is, well, we're lucky that we've got Purge in EU, because frankly there'll be fucking nothing otherwise. You know, the Snapdragon Pro Series for ESL is great, but Wild Rift is probably the lowest performing part of that entire cohort of games. You know, sponsors are not going to look at numbers in Wild Rift and think that's where I want to be, because the numbers in Wild Rift viewership is just not good enough for sponsorship. You know, for at least for significant sponsorship. You know, you can't run esports tournaments on 200 viewers. It's just not. It just doesn't get you across the line in terms of closing sponsorship deals. So there'll just be no money. And if there's no money, there's not going to be, tournaments are going to be existing for fun only. And that won't grow unless the game grows. And the game won't grow unless Riot do something, you know, unless they kind of reignite marketing efforts in the West, which I just don't know if they're going to do. This is harsher than I usually am, I know, but I'm just being honest. The one saving grace here is that if by some miracle the game decides to spring to life and viewership goes through the roof in the European regions and the North American regions, they will step in again and do something. But it won't happen, trust me. I've seen this play out in Vainglory, and it just won't happen. I even tried to run my own tournament in Vainglory. It was good fun, but it just didn't get viewership that was ever going to reignite the scene. But there you go. But yeah, basically, thank you and fuck you is what this says. I don't know. I'm usually quite balanced and level-headed, and my balanced and level-headed viewpoint is I totally understand why this has happened, to an extent. Like I said, I assumed you probably come into this with a multi-level plan, or like a multi-year plan for growth, because you're not going to change the world in a year with mobile esports in the West. My only indication that this has been so sudden is because there must be something internally from a game point of view that it just hasn't done well enough in Europe and North America to warrant spending any more time on esports. They don't believe that esports as a USP is going to have any difference or make any difference to European North American player numbers, and therefore it's a waste of money. That's the only thing that I can say would be likely, because if the player numbers were doing okay, they were still generating new users, they were retaining users really well, then I think esports would exist just for the pure sake that you give something for your top players to strive for. Because the problem that we have now is that top level content creators, a lot of them are pro players, and they're just not going to want to play, and so then you lose content creation, and that sucks, because your content creators are often your biggest champions in the game. You know, they're the guys that try to keep continuous interest in a game. You know, people like Hell's Devil. I mean, Hell's Devil will clearly still be doing Wild Rift, because he's not a pro player. But, you know, there are people like Snitch and Doom, maybe even Darkbreaker to an extent, who is very heavily invested at the high levels of play. If there's nothing for these guys to strive for, then why are they going to bother still playing? They're just not, right? I would not be surprised to see a lot of Wild Rift pros probably head over to Honor of Kings. I know Honor of Kings are doing like a kind of like an international tournament in 2023. Hey, I might even try Honor of Kings. I don't know what it's going to be like, but I might give it a go. In terms of my content, I probably will do less Wild Rift. I do want to get back into doing Wild Rift, but frankly, like, a lot of what I do is to build myself and my knowledge for my casting. And if there isn't going to be anything for me to cast, then I'll probably lose interest. That's just the sad thing about, especially because I've got a full-time job. Casting is kind of like my part-time thing. I don't know if I'm going to have the time to kind of enjoy and play this game at the highest level that I want to. You know, a lot of what keeps my content creation going is the idea that I can be a caster for that pro esports scene. So the reason that Honor of Kings, if they end up needing an English broadcast, then that's what my content will serve to do. You know, I might start playing Honor of Kings and learn it and want to cast it. But I still maintain that this is the best mobile game I've ever played, like alongside Vainglory. I mean, I think Vainglory is up there. It'll be Vainglory and Wild Rift very close, but I still maintain that it's an excellent mobile game. It just clearly didn't have the impact that it needed to in regions outside of Southeast Asia, China, you know, and the rest of Asia. Which sucks, and I'm really sad about, if I'm honest with you. You can probably tell that I'm sad because I'm never usually this harsh. But I am sad. The casting Wild Rift was really the first time that I've enjoyed casting again for a very, very long time. I really didn't like casting League of Legends PC for the last 2 years, really. I did it because I wanted to keep myself relevant. When I started casting Wild Rift, especially as a color commentator again, I loved it. It felt like doing League of Legends PC for the first time. It felt fun. It felt great to understand what was going on. It felt good to be a voice of authority in terms of like how the game is viewed, etc. And I've just you know, I don't know. I might feel better after a few days. This is just a very raw, emotional take. But yeah, that's wild. That's what's fucking happened. Sorry for the swearing, guys. I don't usually swear either. That's why you know I'm upset. Hey, I appreciate you guys being here. I forgot to say thanks G2A for sponsoring the channel, so I'll say it now. Thanks G2A for sponsoring the channel. I haven't done any videos for 2 months, so you don't have to pay me. They are great though. They haven't killed me off just yet. I'm assuming they might, but they haven't killed me off just yet. All right, I'll see you soon.